Shakespeare is considered, and rightly so, one of the greatest poetic minds of the English language. His use of blank verse, while not entirely new or necessarily revolutionary, was arguably the greatest use of that medium during the time it dominated the English stage. His coinage and popularization of words that were, in many cases, made up out of whole cloth, demonstrated the vitality and utility of English, and justified the English tongue as a literary language. His plays have been taught for generations since his death, and have spawned a corpus of literary criticism and scholarship larger than perhaps any writer in English, or for that matter, world history. This being the case, no one should be surprised that there is a dearth of understanding in the Academy of who Shakespeare actually was. Not only are some more seedy sections of the literati rife with conspiracy theories attributing Shakespeare's works to Ben Jonson, Christopher Marlowe, or any number of other contemporary playwrights or groups of writers, but the mainstream Academy increasingly concerns itself with such frivolous and banal explorations of his work that it beggars belief. Over the years, courses such as Queering the Bard have arisen which seek to read modern day preoccupations about sexuality into his sonnets, particularly those composed to the young man. Other critics speculate about purported liaisons in London while his wife Anne remained in Stratford upon Avon, as they suggest are attested to in the sonnets concerning the Dark Lady. Still others maintain that the prevalence of cross-dressing and other gender-transgressive motifs display in Shakespeare's work an utterly out-of-place modern understanding, or lack thereof, of gender relations. I do not concern myself with the idle musings of university English department apparatchiks with room temperature IQs, but I instead turn to the bard himself. What do his plays have to say? What of his poetry? Well, I will share with you one thing. For those of us on the dissident right, Shakespeare is our man. I have often spoken here of the generative principles of mankind. By this I am referring to the positive tendencies of man which lead him into a better way of living, of understanding himself, and of understanding God and the created order. I have not gone at any length into a more thorough explanation of these principles, but I find this the proper occasion to do so, given that they help us understand the bard to a remarkable degree. I will take, as our first example, the principle of fertility. Up until recently, it was an absolute given in human society that men and women were to come together in a marital union, and that the primary purpose of this union was the propagation of the species. In certain pagan cultures, practices such as selective or ritual infanticide contradicted this principle, but in general, even pagans understood the call for mankind to bear fruit as any other plant or animal. This idea, the coming together of male and female, is one of the strongest themes throughout Shakespeare's comedies, and even in the tragedies what is being presented is often a perversion or a subversion of the sacrament of matrimony. Examples of the former can be found in plays such as You Like It, which culminates in a wedding attended by the god Hymen himself, or in A Midsummer Night's Dream, where a knight in the forest helps to satisfactorily resolve a love quadrangle. If we are to speak of the latter, think of Lady Macbeth, who, rather than support her husband in piety, virtue, and loyalty to King Duncan, is obsessed with power, and all too eager to encourage Macbeth in foul murder and bring about his destruction. Or we might also be reminded of Claudius in Hamlet, who sets into motion the tragic downfall of a prince and a kingdom by murdering his brother and taking his wife. Hamlet himself calls attention to the incestuous, blasphemous, and unnatural arrangement of the new Danish monarchs when he declares, "Let me not think on it, frailty thy name is woman. A little month, or ere those shoes were old, she married. O most wicked speed to post! With such dexterity to incestuous sheets, it is not, nor it cannot come to good, but break my heart, for I must hold my tongue." And for what sake is this obsession with matrimony, but for the sake of the next generation? As he writes of the beautiful young man in Sonnet 3, "Look in thy glass, and tell the face thou viewest. Now is the time that face should form another. whose fresh repair, if now thou not renewest, thou dost beguile the world, unbless some mother, for where is she so fair whose uneared womb disdains the tillage of thy husbandry? Or who is he so fond will be the tomb of his self-love to stop posterity? And I do not point this out as to make the case that Shakespeare is obsessed with marriage and progeny, but rather that he is a reflection of an era, a sane era in human history, wherein men did not take some sort of masturbatory pleasure in worshipping themselves, their happiness, and their beauty until all fades, but rather they passed on what was beautiful to a new people, the legions of the unborn, who would need that beauty, that wisdom, and that poetry. But this is merely to speak of Shakespeare in the sense on human generation. He is also, I would wager, one of the best poets to write on the conduct of kings and proper authority. As you heard in the Sceptred Isle speech, which was posted to the channel a few days ago, Shakespeare is also concerned with right governance, good governance. The tension between whether kings are born or made is something that runs right through the tragedy of Richard II and into Henry IV, both parts. The tragedy of Julius Caesar treats not only the vainglory of Caesar, but also the downright bastardly behavior of the conspirators led by Cassius. It demonstrates the fickleness of the masses when they, like children, are swayed by the silver-tongued Antony against the honest Brutus. And Brutus himself serves as a tragic hero who cannot adapt to the changing conditions of the Roman polity, just as many in Shakespeare's day could not adapt to the changing political landscape in England, and many today cannot comprehend the shifts in power occurring before our own eyes. His plays exemplify the well-meaning but incompetent ruler, as in King Lear, and in the inordinate cruel leader. For example, Leontes in The Winter's Tale. In the history plays of Henry IV, the titular great English monarch demonstrates that the ideal king is both anointed and politically shrewd. Thus Shakespeare's exploration of politics, while in some respects out of date, are, in other respects, highly valuable. Moreover, his discourses on the nature of war and uncertain leadership and its effects on the populace help to fix these discussions of power politics into a more human or perhaps more real frame of reference. There are many other respects in which Shakespeare demonstrates a way of viewing the world which is valuable to the dissident right. His works, while increasingly co-opted in an attempt to teach a progressive agenda, will always draw people towards this other world. The concept of such an other world is something that the bard himself would have been comfortable with. Many of his famous plays feature a motif called the green world. In Midsummer, it's the forest beyond the walls of Athens. The forest also features prominently in this role in the play Two Gentlemen of Verona and As You Like It. It is a space outside of the civilized world, where the problems presented in the plot of these comedies are worked through and the complicated intricacies untangled and order restored. In that respect, the green world is a world of the right, and perhaps the imagined worlds of Shakespeare could serve as our own road back to order.